Hello guys, my name is Anna and I'm a Ukrainian. I have decided I will log daily from my country Ukraine since the start of this awful war with Russia. And in my daily videos, I try to update you on the real life situations and stories in my country Ukraine. And of course, I'm glad to answer your questions and to clarify some facts from our culture and our history. But today I don't feel like I want to talk about some serious topics, and that's why I want to talk about Russian diplomacy. Being at war with Russia for more than 2 months, we often think, was it possible to prevent this war? Is it possible to negotiate peace? And the answer to both of these questions is no. Well, first of all, because as many centuries ago Otto von Bismarck stated, the agreement with Russia is not worth the paper on which it was signed. Because throughout the history, there are dozens of examples when Russia totally neglected all of the agreements the country signed with others. That's why it is obvious that it is a manipulative technique just to make a small pause, to regroup or whatever, and continue the dangerous and criminal actions that the country named Russia does in Ukraine. So I am totally satisfied with the fact that the negotiations came to a dead end or whatever, and the only possible format of negotiations with Russia is with the help of weapons. That's why all Ukrainians are very grateful for the military support that we now receive from different parts of the world. Then, was it possible to prevent this war? No, of course, because all the reasons that Russia names as the problem and the reason to start the war are totally irrelevant, and the majority of them are non-existent in general. Ukraine is not a NATO member. Ukraine did not have NATO bases on the territory, and of course we did not prosecute people, we did not execute people, and there are no Nazis on the territory of Ukraine, but for Russian soldiers who are Nazis. So, what is this general problem with Russia apart from President Putin and people who support him? Of course, Russian diplomacy. And I think it is just both a mixture of sad and funny topic at one time. Because when you look at the face of Minister Lavrov, you cannot expect something normal will come out of it. And typically he states the things that are contrary to what he says. And very often there is a joke in media, and not only Ukrainian media, that when you listen to what Lavrov says about Ukraine, get prepared that this is what he's going to do to Ukraine. And actually all of their statements about various dangers, bombing, shellings, I don't know, aggression, they only predicted the things that Russia planned to do. So they came to fight to Ukraine because we were about to start war with Russia, Belarus, and all the other parts of the world because we are so strong. Well, we are so strong. But how does this typical Russian diplomacy look from my subjective perspective? Well, first of all, they poison people. And there are lots of cases all over the world, including countries like the United Kingdom, the United States, and of course many post-Soviet republics, where people who were against Russia and against Putin's regime or knew something they were supposed not to know, they were poisoned. Lots of Russian oligarchs abroad were killed, hanged, or whatever. So one of the typical mechanisms of Russian diplomacy is to kill someone. Another very typical mechanism is to threaten. And many countries were afraid to support Ukraine or were afraid to speak about various diagnoses of Russia because they were afraid of nuclear bombings, full-scale wars, Third World War, and all the other things. Russians are very attentive to listen to other countries speaking, and when they notice this fear, they try to manipulate it, they try to start speaking about that. And it was very illustrative with NATO and the idea to close the Ukrainian skies. And it was someone from NATO to say that if we close the Ukrainian skies, this may provoke Russia and blah, blah, blah. And on the very next day, Lavrov starts speaking, if you close Ukrainian skies. So they are very attentive to analyze the things people are afraid of and to use that against them. And I think that in general, fear is the most important instrument in any totalitarian regime. And of course, today, Russia is one of the top totalitarian regimes in the world. So poisoning, threatening, and another very interesting thing is that the way they live, I mean, Russian diplomats totally contradicts the way they describe they live. Because if you look at many of their speakers, at many of their ambassadors, if you look at Lavrov himself, you will see that his family, his children, they all live abroad. They all live in Western countries. And when you listen about his opinion on these Western countries, you will see that this is a very awful part of the world. And there is always a question, if it's so bad in the West, then why on earth you are all living in the West? And of course, the answer is that you cannot ask such question in Russia because this is too much freedom of speech. And they don't like direct questions to be asked because once again, if they get this question, they try to threaten. All of these characteristics and peculiarities of Russian diplomacy, they did not appear recently. I think this is old Russian tradition for centuries, starting from the Moscovia Tsardom and finishing with modern Russia that is not actually modern but a revived version of the Soviet Union. And Soviet Union was a concentration of all of these pains and fears that Putin now tries to articulate and to threaten the rest of the world. So perhaps the best advice how to fight Russian diplomacy and Russian diplomatic influence in the world is to stop being afraid. And I do like the slogans you can come across in various corners of the world, be brave like Ukraine, but I think this is true. We were not that brave before the start of this war. But when we realized there is nothing to lose and we have to stand for our country, for our freedom, for our independence, and also we have to be a nation with a shield protecting the rest of the civilized world, we stopped being afraid. And that's why I am not afraid of nuclear bombings, because I don't think this is something likely. And even if for some crazy reason it's impossible to avoid such a thing, it is not because of our bravery or the decisions of other countries of the world. This will be just the reason of Putin's head, brain injuries, or whatever is inside his head. So the main advice from all of us Ukrainians is to not be afraid. And I see that many countries are brave enough to be with us, and all our fights are impossible without this support. And the more we demonstrate our strengths and bravery together in the world, the weaker and the more miserable Russia and Russian diplomacy looks right now. I do want to believe that one day next to my country there will be a more democratic and more civilized society where people will be able to speak what they think and not be afraid. But once again, the recipe to not be afraid is not that much important for the Western countries, because their history, their evolution demonstrates that they were brave, and they were brave long before Ukraine became brave. But this is the best advice for the post-Soviet countries like Russia, like Belarus, to not be afraid. Because at a certain point of time, when you are all overwhelmed with fear, you lose the desire to live. What is the worth of such life covered in total fear? And when you lose this fear, you see how silly, how funny Russian diplomacy is, just as the face of Minister Lavrov. Thank you for patronizing me. Thank you for buying me coffees. Thank you for watching and liking these videos. I'm always waiting for your questions because they inspire my future vlogs. Please subscribe if you like my channel. Slava Ukraini!